is most dangerous to your own life has never once felt like an enemy. It has felt intelligent, reasonable, principled. That is why you have protected it. There is a moment right before you make a decision that later costs you something important, when everything inside you aligns with a strange sense of certainty. Your chest tightens slightly, not with fear, but with justification. And in that moment you feel strong. What you rarely notice is the quiet contraction beneath that strength, a subtle narrowing, a refusal to consider one possibility you do not want to see. Carl Jung warned that the shadow does not present itself as obvious darkness. It embeds itself inside your strongest qualities. It hides in your discipline, your morality, your independence, your intelligence. What you are about to hear, because once you see how a single rejected trait organizes your reactions, your relationships, and even your ambitions, you will not be able to return to the idea that you are fully in control. And the part of you that wants to dismiss this right now, the impulse to say this does not apply to you. That reaction is not random. It is the mechanism protecting itself. You believe your strongest trait defines you, the responsible one, the rational one. But Jung described a law of reversal called enantiodromia, where every extreme eventually turns into its opposite. The more intensely you identify with one virtue, the more violently its opposite grows in the dark. Your discipline can hide rigidity. Your kindness can conceal fear of abandonment. Your independence can mask avoidance of vulnerability. And when someone challenges that identity, your reaction is immediate and disproportionate. When someone implies you are wrong in the very area you pride yourself on, something inside you flares. Not externally, perhaps. You remain composed. But internally, there is heat. A silent defense assembling arguments at high speed. That flare is not confidence. It is the shadow guarding the door. The trait you reject lives inside the trait you advertise. And if your greatest strength contains its opposite, then the question is not whether you... The question is, which part of your pride is built on what you refuse to admit? You are not repeating patterns by accident. You are loyal to a version of yourself that once kept you safe. Jung called these emotional imprints complexes. They form when an early experience creates a survival strategy that becomes identity. The quiet child becomes hyper-independent. The criticized child becomes obsessively competent. The ignored child becomes... And years later, you still operate from that script, even when the environment has changed. There is a moment when opportunity appears, and instead of stepping into it fully, you subtly sabotage the scale of it. You tell yourself you prefer simplicity, that you do not need more. But beneath that reasoning is a fear of outgrowing the identity that once protected you. To integrate the shadow often means betraying the role that saved you. And that betrayal feels dangerous, even when it leads to growth. If your current behavior is loyalty to an outdated survival pattern, then who would you become if you stopped protecting it? You say you want change, but you choose familiar discomfort over unfamiliar expansion. Schopenhauer wrote that human beings are driven by a blind will that prefers repetition to uncertainty. Predictable suffering feels manageable. Unknown success. This is why you recreate dynamics that feel strangely similar, even when you consciously dislike them. The tension, the disappointment, the almost but not quite. Pay attention to the quiet relief you feel when something falls apart in a way you expected. There is frustration, yes, but there is also confirmation. A private voice that says, this is how it always goes. That voice stabilizes you. It restores the familiar. The shadow trait here may not be aggression or envy. It may be the need to remain consistent with an old narrative. And if you are attached to a narrative of limitation, what happens when reality offers you something larger than the story you have rehearsed? Sometimes the shadow is not a dark impulse. It is unused power. Assertiveness you labeled as selfish, ambition you called arrogance, authority you dismissed as domination. Jung argued, what you suppress does not vanish. It waits. And while you present yourself as balanced, a quieter part of you feels restless, slightly underexpressed, slightly contained. There are moments when you imagine speaking more directly, acting more decisively, claiming more space. Immediately, another voice corrects you. That is not who you are. Stay measured. Stay acceptable. Over time, that correction becomes automatic. But the cost accumulates in subtle resentment and quiet fatigue. The trait you refuse to see may be the exact force your next level of life requires. And if you continue to reject it, the question is not whether you will remain safe. The question is how long you will tolerate feeling incomplete. Integration is not self-improvement. It is the collapse of a comfortable illusion. Jung did not promise purity. He warned that whatever remains when you insist you are only rational, your suppressed emotion chooses your partners. When you insist you are only kind, your buried anger shapes your boundaries. When you insist you are only independent, your hidden fear determines your intimacy. Fate feels external, until you realize it is simply your denied nature operating without supervision. The shadow trait you refuse to see is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to be acknowledged. The pattern of repetition, the subtle self-betrayal before growth. These are not random flaws, they are signals. Once you recognize the mechanism, you cannot unknow it. The control does not disappear instantly, but the blindness does. And blindness was always the real prison. What you choose to face after this moment will determine whether the shadow continues to run your life quietly or whether you begin the far more difficult task of becoming whole. That discomfort means something real moved. Most people will hear this and return to distraction. They will choose comfort over awareness. They will keep living as if the mechanism does not exist, and their shadow will keep running their lives in silence. If you are still here, you are not most people. This channel is not for passive listening. It is for those willing to confront what they avoid. Every video builds on the last. Every insight. And once you begin this process, stopping halfway is far more uncomfortable than continuing. Subscribe, not for motivation, not for entertainment, but to stay in the tension that forces growth. Because the moment you stop confronting your shadow, it quietly takes the lead again.